Well, we are very pleased to bring you news from Canada live on Facebook here on Fridays at 14:15 hours GMT or 10:15 a.m. Eastern Time. We are also heard on World Radio Paris and on shortwave service from Germany and Cowrie 97.5 FM, and that, of course, is Radio Nigeria. Hi, I'm Lynn Desjardins, and with me today are Levon Sevens.
Hello.
And Terry Haig.
Hi.
And our web mistress, Marie-Claude Simard.
Hi.
And in the control room, we have Leo Jimeno and our technicians today, Marc-André and Benoit. Well, coming up in this half hour, Levon, you've got something big for us.
Yes, I'll speak with the commander of the Canadian peacekeeping contingent in Mali, and he joins us live on Skype from the UN base in Gao.
I'll tell you about a provincial government's decision to override the constitutional rights to forbid public servants to wear religious symbols.
And I will talk to someone about whether or not Major League Baseball is coming back to Montreal.
We'll have those stories and more coming up on... Well, the Canadian peacekeeping mission in Mali is in the news today. The United Nations has formally asked Canada to extend the mission in Mali for a few months. The United Nations wants Canada to stay in Mali until the Romanian contingent, which is replacing, is up and running. So for more on the Canadian mission in Mali, we have a very special guest today. Levon, why don't you present our guest?
Yes, Linda, we have joining us live from the UN base in Gao in northern Mali, Colonel Travis Moran. Colonel Moran, thank you very much for joining us, and welcome to Radio Canada International.
You're very welcome. Thank you very much.
Well, before we get to that UN request, can you just tell us about your mission in Mali? What is Task Force Mali, and what are Canadians doing in Mali?
Yeah, certainly. I'd love to be able to tell you about that. Canada is participating in the multi-dimensional integrated stabilization mission in Mali, and we've been doing that since August. We have two primary tasks. The first task is to provide a line of medical evacuation, which we do with our Chinook helicopters escorted by Griffins. And our second task is to provide utility or transport of personnel and equipment throughout the battle space.
Now, just talk a bit more about this aspect. So Canada has, 3 Chinooks and 5 Griffin helicopters. And as I understand, the Chinooks are almost like flying ambulances. Can you just explain what specifically their role is?
Yes, certainly. The Chinooks that we have configured for the medical evacuation, they're in a special configuration that we don't normally have in Canada. And this is the first time that Canada has fielded this type of capability on deployed operations. So in the back of the Chinook, we've taken out some of the seats so we can have 3 litter patients and 4 walking wounded. On board as part of the crew, we have a critical care doctor on board, an acute care physician on board. We have a critical care nurse on board, plus 2 medical technicians. And these are the 4 individuals that work as a medical team to be able to deliver blood products, conduct ultrasounds in the back of the helicopter, and really give that patient a chance to survive from the point of injury back to surgery table.
Of course, the peacekeeping mission in Mali is often referred to as the most dangerous UN mission right now, and the Canadian contingent had quite a busy beginning of the year. Can you talk to me about the 2 times in January you were called in to respond to attacks on UN peacekeepers?
Yeah, so we were just in the process of handing over from Roto Zero, so Colonel McKenna was the task force commander at that time. I was fortunate enough to be on the ground with the majority of my team, so we watched the first rotation go through those events. And so on the 25th of, the 20th of January was the Duenza attack, and so Sri Lankan peacekeepers at that time had struck a mine. So the Griffins and the Chinook went to that location and evacuated them back to a Timbuktu, which is a northern hospital. It was the closest hospital at the time. And then on the 25th of January, a forward operating base named Aglahawk north of Kidal in Mali was also attacked by what we deem a complex attacks with suicide bombers followed by assaulters coming through the hole in the walls. And so on both of those occasions, Canada launched its Griffins and Chinooks in support of those wounded soldiers.
What was it like for Canadian soldiers, who had to respond to this pretty traumatic events?
Well, the team that was here, they'd already conducted 5 medical evacuations prior, so they had had some experience. But by all accounts, these were the 2 most severe. The crews reacted as they're trained, so there's very set drills to be able to get in the shortest amount of time possible. When the crews arrived, there were no more combat conditions in either location, and so there was no existential or continued threat, so they were able to land on the ground with the Chinook, with the Griffins in an overwatch position to make sure that there was no more threat. And they loaded the casualties and came back. And so for the doctors and the nurses and the medics in the back, that is what they've trained to do. That's what they've done in hospital rooms across Canada. And so they were able to practice their well-trained skills.
What has it been like for you for your rotation?
It's getting hotter. That's probably the most outstanding thing. I know it seems a trite point, but it was 43 degrees in the shade today. So with that comes its own operating challenges. Sometimes we wish we had the snow back in Canada that you did. But we've been able to continue on the great work that Roto Zero did under Colonel McKenna. We have the same standby. We do the same training, and we've been able to conduct 1 additional medical evacuation and an additional, I would say, 30 utility missions where we've been able to keep Allied and MINUSMA troops off the road to be able to conduct patrols and talk with villagers.
Now, of course, we mentioned earlier that the United Nations has asked Canada to extend the mission until the Romanian troops arrive and are operational. Of course, we don't know whether the Canadian government will grant this request, but if it does, what would it mean for you on the ground?
Well, nothing would change immediately. We will carry out our mission until the new determined end date, so whatever that would be, and we will just see how we can facilitate the Romanians coming in as quickly as possible. We transfer tactics, techniques, and procedure, maps, imagery, operational checklists. So in terms of how it would affect us directly, it wouldn't affect us immediately.
But that would mean that your families don't get to see you for a few more weeks at least?
That could be, if the government does decide that, then yes, the majority of us would stay here in place until the end of the mission. But currently, right now, it's 31 July.
Well, thank you very much for the time, and stay safe, and safe return to Canada.
All right. Well, thank you very much for this opportunity to talk about our mission here and the great work that Canadians are doing on behalf of the government.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. And that was Colonel Travis Morin. He's commander of the Canadian Peacekeeping Contingent in Mali, and he joined us live from Gao in Mali.
Yes.
So coming up, we'll tell you why a provincial government plans to overwrite guaranteed rights, guaranteed constitutional rights. Just a moment. That was really good, Evan. Yeah, very good. No questions from the public.
Completely covered.
The government of the province of Quebec has proposed a law which would make it illegal for civil servants to wear religious symbols while they are at work. Now, it's a complicated issue, and I think it would be important to have a little bit of background on this. The early settlers who came from France to what is now Quebec were very much dominated by the Roman Catholic Church. Religious authorities ran education, health, and they really had tight control in general over traditional religion, traditional ways. So in the 1950s and 60s, Quebec threw off the yoke of religion, and there was a real push for secularism and a desire to make the government and very much a society free of religion. We should also note that Quebec is the only majority French-speaking province in Canada, and being surrounded by a sea of English, its governments have taken many steps to try to safeguard the French language and the culture. So over the years, there's been increasing immigration, and in some quarters, this is seen as a threat to the identity of Quebec. So for more than a decade, there's been much controversy over how far Quebec should go to accommodate religions. Now, today, the current provincial government has tabled a law which would ban public employees from wearing religious symbols. This would affect people like judges, police officers, prison guards, court clerks, teachers, school principals. And in order to pass such a law, it plans to override the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms. This is allowed because Canada's Constitution includes a specific measure called the Notwithstanding Clause. Now, I wanted to know, what is the value of a Constitution if any government can simply override it? So I called the Dean of Law at McGill University, Robert Leckie, and began by asking him how Quebec law would contravene the Canadian Constitution.
Well, the content of the law, in terms of telling certain public servants that they cannot wear religious symbols, would sort of obviously limit freedom of religion. Because we can see that it's particular religious groups that would be affected, it would probably also limit the right to equality or to protection from discrimination on grounds such as religion. But the government is trying to protect it from any challenges on those bases. So the government is trying to shield it, if you will, with what we call the Notwithstanding Clause, which says that a law has its effects despite or notwithstanding rights in the Canadian Charter.
So essentially, a government can pass a notwithstanding clause. What does that do?
Well, it essentially tells courts that this law is operating despite certain specified rights in the Charter. So it closes the door to the normal process of constitutional challenges to a law that someone thinks infringes their rights.
So what's the point of having a constitution if any government can just get around it?
Well, it's quite distinct. So not all national constitutions have anything like Canada's Notwithstanding Clause. It was a political compromise. And the notion is that it allows the political leaders to take responsibility for a decision that they wish to act despite human rights or despite courts' interpretations of human rights. And to kind of build in that accountability, the Canadian mechanism provides that it only operates for 5 years at a time. So the notion is that between a first use of the Notwithstanding Clause, at the time, 5 years later, if you want to keep it in place, it'll have to be renewed. And the notion is, of course, that there will have been at least one general election in those intervening 5 years. So there is an attempt to make it public, to make it political. And so we're seeing that now. The political process is saying we want to use this tool.
You and others have written to the Quebec government urging it to not use the Notwithstanding Clause. Why?
Well, it's clearly, it is one of their legal tools at their disposal. So I do not dispute that. But I would say to them, of all the things on which you wish to use it, of all the matters on which you say, look, we're going to foreclose any kind of court challenge, we do not want to have to make arguments defending our law in court. We do not want to have to persuade a judge that what we're doing is reasonable or necessary. Personally, I wouldn't choose one that has such a clearly identifiable group of victims. So the set of people who will be directly impacted by this law is very small. There aren't any police officers, as far as we know, wearing religious symbols. There may be a couple of judges wearing kippas, but fundamentally it's a group of women teachers who wear headscarves, or women wearing headscarves who would want to become teachers, and this law is targeting them. So I think given these sort of intense harms visited on a small minority group, I would say, why do it in this case? Why would you do it now?
This use of the Notwithstanding Clause is supposed to be rare. Do you think this particular use of it will set a precedent and it will become more common? Well,
in a sense, the neighboring province of Ontario toyed with using the Notwithstanding Clause last year on a very different matter. But I do have concerns that when you start using it, it's there to be used prudently and occasionally. But to use it just to kind of channel majority sentiments on the backs of a small minority, that does concern me. That worries me.
Well, McGill Dean of Law Robert Leckie's concerns were echoed by many other people. A major school board in Montreal said it flat out would not apply the law. A teachers' union is taking the matter to court. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau reacted to the news that the law was being tabled, saying, "It is unthinkable to me in a free society that we would legitimize discrimination against citizens based on their religion." So various religious groups have weighed in as well, and this is, of course, only the beginning of what is going to be a highly acrimonious debate.
Absolutely.
Yeah. More in just a moment. Well, if it's spring, it must be baseball. Terry, talk to me about spring and baseball.
Spring and baseball go together. You don't get the feeling so much here in Montreal because there's still snow on the ground as farther south. But it's the best words anyone can hear in the world in February is pitchers and catchers are reporting. Okay, and that means they're down in spring training now. The Toronto Blue Jays, our national team, because we only have one team in Canada, right, every year at the end of spring training play a couple of exhibition games in Montreal at Olympic Stadium to complete their exhibition season before the start of the year. What the Expos left in 2004, leaving a lot of fans heartbroken.
Yes.
Okay.
I wept myself.
So these exhibition games have served as a way for Montreal fans to try to send a message to Major League Baseball, the cartel that is Major League Baseball, that if they bring a team back here or create a new team, the audience is here. The support will be here. So they have turned out in numbers. They turned out about just slightly less than 25,000 on Monday and Tuesday night of this week, which is a lot of people for a school night.
And in chilly weather.
In chilly weather, in a school night, for a school night. And so I spoke to Dave Kaufman. They've been doing this for 6 years now, since 2014, okay? And I spoke to Dave Kaufman, who's a journalist and talk show host, and a sort of member of the Expos Nation. I mean, he's a fanatic. He wants his team back. And I asked him, are we getting any closer to getting a team back? And here's what he said.
I have to assume that we're getting closer just because every year we're another year further away from 2004 when they left. But I know what you mean, Terry. There is a bit of a feeling of rinse, lather, repeat in our yearly chat about the excitement levels for baseball coming back. And it's a hard thing to gauge because, for example, this year, another mediocre Toronto Blue Jays team comes to town. And I know that the Milwaukee Brewers fought for the pennant last year and almost made the World Series, but it's not a team that brings any excitement. I don't think Montrealers are lining up to come see Christian Yelich play baseball at the Big O this week. There's a disconnect between the excitement levels that we saw when baseball first returned to Montreal with the Blue Jays and what we're seeing today. Now, that being said, from a logistic standpoint, from a business standpoint, I have to believe that we're closer today than ever. So maybe there isn't a correlation at all between butts in the seats and the chances of us getting a team back.
How important is the stadium, Dave?
I mean, I think it's crucially important because of optics. If the newfangled Montreal Expos were to return to town and set up shop permanently at the Big O, that would be I mean, I'm just doing the math in my head. I think it would be the fourth oldest stadium in baseball. Mm-hmm. And if not fourth, then fifth. It's right there. I mean, Fenway in Boston and Wrigley in Chicago and Dodger Stadium in Los Angeles. And I don't know what I'm missing, but I think the next one would be 1976's Olympic Stadium.
Okay.
So that right away is not the greatest model. I mean, there are grumblings about a chance of 15 centimeters of snow hitting in the next couple of days, and that preventing the games from starting or being played on time, or requiring a Herculean effort to get rid of the snow on the roof. I think we've seen enough and had enough of the Olympic Stadium. I'm not a guy who has trouble with the location. I'm not. Look, I used to go. You knew me when I was a kid going to those games, Terry. So I was never afraid of a piece of concrete falling and hitting me on the head. But that was the conventional wisdom in the city, was that this stadium was had seen better days.
Will it be expansion or a team moving here? And if a team moves here, the conventional wisdom is it comes from Tampa Bay or Oakland.
I genuinely believe that, as much as it saddens me, that Tampa Bay will move here. It doesn't seem to have the support there, and memories seem short, because as much as I remember when the support wasn't here, it's as if that never happened. And, you know, I think a lot about how different things were 15 years ago, when every day at the stadium felt like a funeral, and people made fun of you for wearing an Expos hat, if you could even find one in a store. Mm-hmm. We've done a complete 180 since those days, even to the point that back then politicians would say, no money, no anything for this American. It was the America versus Canada side of it. The baseball isn't our game. Things happened over the last 10, 15 years that affected whether it was our nostalgia, whether it was the passing of Gary Carter and our loss of innocence. It all seems to be heading in one direction, and I think more than all of the emotional appeals, it's money. People know that this makes money, so Montrealers want to make money too.
So there you go. That's my conversation with Dave Kaufman about the possible return of Major League Baseball to Montreal. The charge is being led by Stephen Brofman, who is the son of the Expos' original owner. They've got a space there. There's a space down by the Lachine Canal, or down in Griffintown, where you used to come into work, right? Which is just south of the city center. But there's developers who also want the land, along with Stephen Brofman. The land is owned by the government of Canada, but now at least Stephen Brofman and the guy who wants to develop apartment buildings have agreed that maybe we should develop all this together. But still, we need money. We need the federal government to okay it. But Stephen Brofman is in charge of raising money for the Liberal Party. But they better get that done before the fall, right? Before the fall election. So we'll see. We'll see how it unfolds. It's really difficult. It is a cartel. I mean, and nobody can say anything, because Major League Baseball, it's like OPEC, man. You know, you don't mess with them. You know, they control it all. So Mitch Garber, who gets a cut of every time anybody plays online poker anywhere in the world, I think, head of the Cirque du Soleil, and Brofman are leading the charge. I don't know if we have the wealth in Montreal to sustain it, to sustain a team, because to build a stadium and to bring a team in would cost $1 billion beans. Whoa. And the American dollar, the Canadian dollar is not so hot right now.
Terry, so what am I hearing about Vancouver getting
hey, like, no, that's minor league city. It's possible. There's Portland, Oregon. There's San Antonio, Texas. There's other places that are vying. Of course, this is what, if you're in the cartel, you want everybody competing, right?
Up the price.
And the other thing that stands in the way is, for instance, when they built the hockey rink in Quebec City, it was all taxpayers' money, and the NHL decided not even to come. There can't be any public money going in. No public money will go for a stadium. They keep saying it's a money-making situation. It's not. There's all low-wage jobs. You're selling hot dogs. You're cleaning up. It's not, after the construction of a stadium, it's low-wage jobs.
So we shall see. Wait and see.
It'll be a while to wait, though.
Yeah, that'll take some time. All right, we now come to you, Marie-Claude.
Oh,
you
yes!
have a little something
finally,
special for us.
Yes, well, I want to have the occasion to say again how wonderful our website is. And there's all those pages that people might not be aware of that are really worth exploring. And we have that page, I'm going to talk to you today about the Sketches of Life. So Sketches of Life, you access them by, you see a little icon on our homepage to access it. And it's a page we do in collaboration with our partners, other international radios in Europe, so Romania, Switzerland, Poland, and Czechoslovakia. So here we go. You go to our website, the homepage, and there's that little Sketches of Life icon there. You click on it, And so on that page, we simply present soundscapes and images that of common places in all of our countries, like the church, the market, and the train station. A few months back, I showed you the one I made in Ganawage of the church. Now, this week, I wanted to show you the one Leo, our colleague, Leo Guimeno, who's right here on the other side of the window, who did at the train station, Montreal Central train station. So, because this one we haven't looked at it. So here it is. And there's sound, of course, because the sound is very impressive.
I can't hear it, but I hope the listeners have got it.
Yeah, so this is...
oh, this is the Bonaventure...
Yeah, right in the middle of... that's it, right in the middle of downtown. And we're going to listen to the sound.
Taxi stand?
Yeah.
Special appeal, right?
Yeah.
Always romantic, eh?
Is that a 50s mural? It's really quite
very
impressive.
Well, I used to go there every day for
too.
years. And I've never noticed all those little details. And those, it's very interesting when you start documenting everything. So.
Yeah, I used to work, and on my way to work, especially if it was snowing or raining, I would cut through the station just to stay underground.
Yeah. Montreal has quite a network
you can
of
go for
underground
miles.
tunnels.
That's it.
So people often will do that just to avoid the bad weather, just go through underground tunnels to get from point A to point B in the downtown area.
Yeah, so there trains from the suburbs are connecting, but also trains that are going further, like in other provinces and stuff like that. And it's very crowded at rush hour.
Unfortunately, we still don't have those high-speed trains like that you see in Europe. It would certainly cut travel times between Montreal and Toronto.
Let's face it, our train network is nothing like in Europe. And maybe it's not possible.
Well, our distances are much larger than what they are in Europe. So, but we are behind, and it would be great if we, for example, in the corridor, the Montreal, Quebec City, Toronto corridor,
yeah,
for
the
years,
Windsor, Quebec City corridor.
For years, we've been talking about, having high-speed trains there, but it's, I don't know.
That would be great. It's so pleasant to be in a train. I like it so much more than the bus or even driving if you have
or
to.
even the airport.
Yeah.
I mean, people increasingly with all the security lineups and, getting to an airport and getting on the plane, there are a lot of people who will simply take the train, say, from Montreal to Toronto, or certainly from Montreal to Quebec City.
Well, what about the train to New York? That's really beautiful when you go down next to Lake Champlain.
Oh, really?
The one that I really want to take is the one out west, the one that goes through,
that you don't see so much.
through
It's
the
just
Rockies.
flat, man.
No.
Yeah,
Until you get to the
once
Rockies.
you get to the
Until you get to the
Rockies.
Rockies, yeah.
I've never been on the train in that part of Canada, so it would be...
Oh, it's spectacular.
Yeah.
It's just spectacular.
But it's, I mean, the leading up, but there's a long lead up to the Rockies.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, how many days does it take you to get through the prairie provinces?
Two
we
days.
have, in the West, we have 3 very large provinces that probably span, 2,000 kilometers?
At least.
Yeah.
But the Rockies are stunning. They're stunning when you're on a train.
Yeah.
I know people who've done the whole thing, like the VRI, let's say, has a package that you can buy and you see go through the whole, and they really loved it. You kind of bound with the people that you stay there for 4 or 5 days and explore the country together. So.
Well, even more scary, I know some people who actually went across by bicycle.
Across
Well,
Canada?
from the west, from Victoria, as far as Montreal. They didn't, so that, they missed out to the eastern part. They're planning to do that this summer. But they were pretty skinny by the time we met up with them. I was in Georgian Bay on a very small little tour.
That's a project for both of you guys. You're bike riders.
Yeah, right. Okay, Terry. Sure enough. On that note,
I'll be in the car behind with the water.
Canoeing through
carrying
Canada.
that
absolutely.
too. There's all
With all
kinds
the networks of rivers.
But we're talking 5,000 kilometers from one end to the other, so it's pretty big. All right, on that note, we should let it go. It ends the link, and if you'd like to hear the complete versions of any of our interviews or see some of the stories we've posted, You can find us at rcinet.ca. Big thank you to Levon, Sevens, Terry Haig, Marie-Claude Simard, and of course, everyone who's behind the glass there. I'm Lynn Desjardins, and we hope to see you again next week.